time, which is
And
weird.
you're free to have sex
And-
as long
yeah,
as you want,
exactly.
as often as you want.
Yes, exactly.
And the opposite in this class, one of the things we talk about is the coin. So if you do something on, here's my little Lincoln. If you do it on one side of the coin, you're doing it on the flip side of the coin. Her mother is a virgin. Her mother thinks she's a virgin. Her mother does not have sex. So you either do a 0 or you do 100. Okay, so we talk about these terms here. I have one of the posters here. So if she's promiscuous and her mother is, celibate, it's the same exact thing. It's the same problem behavior. So she's no different, or her mother is no different than her in her criticism. Okay, so we have to look at the behaviors that we're doing and where we're getting these notions and these beliefs that something is good or bad, because these beliefs are driven by these ancient sort of beliefs that pleasures of the flesh come from sex. Come from, why? Because at the moment of conception. It is only through sex that you can have a child. It is only through sex that you can conceive something. It is only, the TED Talk guy was talking about creation and play. And it was interesting because creation isn't only sexual creation, but all creation has an origin story. All creation has a conception. That means that the moment you conceive anything, the moment they thought about jumping with those wires, something already had to go wrong. Immediately. Anything that has a conception already has some flaw, because you're being expelled from the Garden of Eden. There has to be a death. The moment you have a thought, there has to be a death. Because that means that that thought had an origin, had a beginning. That means it has to have an end. That's life. It is only through not thinking, not living, not doing that you're going to prevent death. Therefore, don't ever incarnate. That's the only solution. But people like your mom don't understand that. They think that they're protected by not doing.
She's like, you were made perfect, and in order to get to that perfection again is by giving yourself to him.
Well, you weren't made perfect the moment she conceived you.
Right.
The moment she conceived you, you became imperfect.
Well, I've been imperfect since they slept together. I mean,
So was she.
Her uncle, and she's his niece.
But regardless of the side story,
No.
regardless of the incestuous story, the
Yeah.
reality is that every single one of us, the moment that that conception occurred, but are you understanding that the moment that there's a thought,
Yeah. You're already sinning. You're already.
the moment that there's a thought, there is already an expulsion from perfection. The moment you have a thought, there is already an issue, so to speak, quote unquote. I don't see it as an issue, it's life. That's why it's interesting, and you see here with Buddha. Buddha wanted to neglect the flesh. Buddha said, in order for me to reach enlightenment, I need to not give the flesh pleasure. That is what a lot of these sort of saintly beings thought. So it was like Jesus in the forest for 40 days. He didn't take the bread from Satan. And Buddha was sitting there under the tree, and he's like, damn, I'm hungry. And he was not going to get enlightened by thinking about the rice. He needed to give himself some rice. Because the thought is already the issue. So he was like, well, if I keep negating myself from eating the rice, I am never going to get enlightened because I'm going to constantly be thinking about it. It's one of the reasons why when we're thinking about something so often, we have to kind of jump in and do it. Not keeping ourselves from doing things is not necessarily the answer, because the thought is already that moment of creation. You've already sort of killed yourself off. You've already started that process. So Buddha was sitting there and said, I'm hungry, and he had the rice. Then he was able to sit in meditation and reach enlightenment. But he was also a symbolism of death and rebirth, because it was through him feeding the flesh that he was able to reach enlightenment. It's a different version of it, but it's another version. This is Kali, and this is another version of Kali. And Kali is actually, and we talked about her before, but she is the mother of death. And she's necessary because she rules death and rebirth. And so we cannot have life without death. And so we see this repeated over and over and over again. And then I just have the red chalice. I bought that chalice in somewhere in Europe. I think it was Latvia. And it's from the Mary Magdalene, some place that was named after Mary Magdalene. And when you think of Mary Magdalene, you think of a prostitute. You think of, you know, right? I know you know her well.
Think of me.
You think of Mary Magdalene, you think of the prostitute, because that was who Jesus saved from all of the demons. But it's the metaphor of Virgin Mary and Mary Magdalene. And you've got the virgin and you've got the whore. And so we have both aspects of ourselves. Again, if you have death, you have life. If you have life, death, you have rebirth. And so we have to get into thinking about these cycles of life, death, and rebirth in order to understand that that is how every single cycle in our life works. There is not one cycle that does not have the next. What season are we in? If Florida had seasons, what season would be this? In winter. What comes after winter? Spring. In everybody's life, after you get through your winter, that's my winter, then you have a spring. That's my spring.
Like many trees.
Yeah. That's as good as you get from the drawing. And my little bird. Okay. So every winter leads to a spring. Every death leads to a rebirth. It's the cycle. It's always the cycle. It is never, never ending. And so once we get used to this, then we can understand that we're never going to be stuck in a cycle forever. Believe me, I am in a major winter. I am in a major death right now. It feels like I'm never going to get out of it.
But
And
you get
so-
out at some point.
Yeah.
But I know this, so I have to continue remembering it. That, okay, a rebirth is coming, a spring is coming, because if not, I'd kill myself. And that's oftentimes what happens where people get hopeless, in the cycles of grief. The original cycles of grief by Kubler-Ross, it ended at acceptance. Dr. Wright added hope to it. You know, we have to have hope at the end of the day that we are going to get out of these grief cycles. Because if not, and that's part of the reason why we invent these stories, is to have hope that we're going to...
Can I interrupt for a minute? Today is Student Appreciation Day, and they would like you to go downstairs. They have water, granola bar, and an apple.
Okay, so let's pause that.
And I went